I'm Alara, 38 female. I live in a city apartment that I chose for its quiet and its solitude, a small sanctuary from the demanding world of corporate finance where I work as a senior analyst. For most of my adult life, that sanctuary was the only space that was truly mine. For 2 decades, I was not just a daughter. I was a silent benefactor, a financial safety net my family took for granted. This is the story of how I finally cut the strings and let them fall. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The world I command Monday through Friday is one of numbers, of elegant spreadsheets and complex algorithms that predict market fluctuations. As a senior financial analyst for a major investment firm, my job is to find order in chaos, to see the patterns others miss, and to make cold, calculated decisions based on data. My performance is measured in basis points and profit margins. It's a high-pressure environment, but it's clean, logical. There are rules. Effort is rewarded, and value is recognized. My personal life, however, operated on a completely different set of principles. For 20 years, my second, unpaid job was managing the precarious finances of my parents, Margaret and Richard. It started small, just after I landed my first real job out of college. My mother, Margaret, called in a flutter of manufactured panic. The property tax bill was due, and they were just a little short. Could I help? It was a few $100s. Of course, I said yes. I was proud to be able to help, to be the responsible daughter they could rely on. That first payment felt like a rite of passage into adulthood. What I didn't realize at the time was that it wasn't a one-time request, it was an audition, and I had passed with flying colors. Soon, a little short became their permanent financial state. The requests grew in frequency and scale. The car needed a new transmission, a water pipe burst. My father, Richard, needed an expensive dental procedure not fully covered by insurance. Each time I stepped in, I never asked invasive questions, I just transferred the money. To make things simpler, I eventually took over the payments directly. First, it was the utilities, set to auto-pay from my account. Then came the mortgage on their sprawling suburban home, a house far too big for 2 people in their 60s. I convinced myself it was the right thing to do. They had raised me, and this was how I showed my gratitude. It was my duty. This arrangement was the unspoken foundation of our family, a secret kept from the outside world. To their friends and neighbors, my parents lived a comfortable, self-sufficient life. They hosted dinner parties, went on modest vacations, and maintained the illusion of middle-class stability. Behind the curtain, I was the one keeping the machinery running, the invisible engine powering their lives. They never acknowledged it, at least not directly. My contributions were accepted with the same casual entitlement as the sunrise. The most jarring part of this dynamic was my cousin Daniel. He was 2 years younger than me, my aunt's son, but my parents had always treated him as the child they'd wished for. Daniel was the golden boy, effortlessly charming and chronically irresponsible. While I was studying for my finance exams, Daniel was backpacking through Europe on a shoestring budget that was mysteriously never his own. While I was working late to build my career, Daniel was bouncing between get-rich-quick schemes that never panned out. Yet, in my parents' eyes, he could do no wrong. He was ambitious, they'd say, a free spirit. When he visited, our family home transformed. My mother's voice would rise an octave, filled with a warmth and excitement I hadn't heard since his last appearance. My father, a man of few words with me, would laugh heartily at Daniel's tired jokes, clapping him on the back. They would hang on his every word as he spun tales of his latest venture, never questioning the logistics or the lack of results. He was the sun, and everyone else, especially me, was just a planet in his orbit. I remember one Christmas dinner vividly. I was 32. I had just received a significant promotion at work. I'd brought expensive gifts for everyone, carefully chosen and beautifully wrapped. My parents opened theirs with polite, distracted smiles. "That's lovely, dear," my mother said, setting aside the cashmere scarf without a second glance. A few minutes later, Daniel breezed in, an hour late, holding a cheap bottle of wine. The room erupted in cheers. My father pulled out an envelope. "For your new business idea, son," he said, his voice thick with pride. Daniel pocketed the cash, which I knew from the thickness of the envelope was at least a few $1,000s, with a slick grin. He hadn't even browed. HT them a gift. I sat there, watching the scene unfold, a familiar cold knot tightening in my stomach. The promotion I'd worked so hard for went unmentioned for the rest of the evening. This was the pattern. My achievements were met with quiet nods, while Daniel's mere existence was a cause for celebration. I was the foundation, sturdy and invisible. He was the decoration, flashy and admired. I paid their mortgage, they paid for his dreams. I rationalized it for years. I told myself that they worried about him, that their fawning attention was a symptom of their concern for his instability. I told myself that they didn't praise me because they didn't need to. They knew I was dependable. They knew I was okay. It was a lie, of course, a carefully constructed narrative to protect myself from a painful truth. I was not their priority. I was a utility. My friend, Chloe, was the only one who knew the full extent of the arrangement. We had been friends since college, and she had watched the entire saga unfold. "It's not right, Alara," she would tell me over our weekly coffee dates. "They're using you. Daniel gets the love and you get the bills. When does it stop?" "It's just what I do," I'd reply with a shrug, unable to articulate the complex web of guilt, duty, and longing for approval that kept me trapped. "They're my parents. Who else is going to help them?" "Daniel," she'd suggest, raising a skeptical eyebrow. We'd both let out a short, mirthless laugh. The idea of Daniel contributing anything of substance was laughable. His role was to receive, not to give. And my role was to enable not just his irresponsibility, but my parents' blatant favoritism. I was funding the very system that marginalized me. And so it went, year after year. The automatic payments flowed from my bank account like a river, carving a deep canyon of resentment within me that I refused to acknowledge. I was the good daughter, the responsible one. I was the shadow that kept their world bright. I thought that was enough. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my father, Richard, his voice uncharacteristically formal. "Alara, your mother and I need you to come over this Saturday, around 2 o'clock. Our lawyer, Mr. Davison, will be here. We have some important family matters to finalize." My blood ran cold. Mr. Davison was their estate lawyer. I felt a flicker of something I couldn't name, dread mixed with a strange, hopeful anticipation. Were they finally going to acknowledge my contributions? Perhaps they were setting up a trust and wanted to explain my role in it, to finally put on paper the gratitude they never expressed in words. Despite years of evidence to the contrary, a small, naive part of me still craved their validation. "Okay, Dad." "I'll be there," I said, my voice steady. That Saturday, I drove to my childhood home under a slate-gray sky that mirrored my mood. The house, with its manicured lawn and freshly painted trim, both funded by me, looked as perfect and impenetrable as ever. I walked through the front door and was hit by a wall of forced pleasantries. My mother, Margaret, kissed the air beside my cheek, her smile as brittle as spun sugar. My father stood stiffly by the fireplace, avoiding my eyes. And there, sitting on their best sofa as if he owned the place, was Daniel. He gave me a lazy, triumphant smirk. The lawyer, a portly man in an ill-fitting suit, sat in an armchair, a leather briefcase resting by his feet. The atmosphere in the living room was thick with unspoken truths. I sat in a chair opposite them, my back ramrod straight, feeling like a defendant at a trial I didn't know I was a part of. After a few agonizing moments of small talk about the weather, my father cleared his throat. "Well, let's get to it," he said, nodding towards Mr. Davison. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a sheaf of documents bound in a neat blue cover. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice a dry monotone that sucked all the air out of the room. "Richard and Margaret have asked me to come here today to formally review the final version of their will and estate plan. They wanted the key beneficiaries to be present so that everything is clear and there are no misunderstandings down the line." He used the word beneficiaries, plural. The tiny flicker of hope inside me rekindled. I watched as he adjusted his glasses and began to read. He droned on about legal clauses and executor appointments, his voice a meaningless hum in the background. My focus was on my parents. My mother was staring intently at a porcelain bird on the mantelpiece. My father was studying his shoes. Daniel, however, was looking directly at me, his eyes gleaming with a kind of predatory delight. He knew what was coming. Then, Mr. Davison arrived at the section on asset distribution. Regarding the primary residence located at 123 Maple Lane, he read, and all associated contents, it is to be bequeathed in its entirety to their beloved nephew, Daniel Sterling. I felt a jolt, as if the chair had been electrified. I gripped the armrests, my knuckles turning white. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe there were other assets, the savings accounts, the investments I had helped them manage. The lawyer continued, his voice unwavering. All liquid assets, including checking account number 7465, savings account number 8821, and all brokerage and investment portfolios held at Capital Management, are to be transferred in full to the aforementioned Daniel Sterling. He paused, flipping a page. Finally, regarding their daughter, Elara Vance. This was it. The room fell silent. I held my breath, waiting for the words that would make sense of all the years of sacrifice. I wasn't expecting a fortune, just an acknowledgement. A token. Something to say, we saw you, we knew what you did. Mr. Davison cleared his throat. It is their stated wish that she receives their heartfelt thanks for her support over the years. No material assets or funds are allocated to her name. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Nothing, not a single dollar, not a sentimental piece of furniture, not even a photograph, just an empty, meaningless thank you buried in a legal document. The 20 years of mortgage payments, the countless bills, the emergency funds, all of it had been erased in a single sentence. I wasn't a daughter, I was a service provider whose contract had expired. I slowly turned my head to look at my parents. My mother finally met my gaze, her expression a pathetic mixture of defiance and cowardice. Elara, you have your own successful career, she said, her voice thin and reedy. You're stable, Daniel, he needs the help. He needs a foundation. We had to make sure he would be okay. It's about securing the family legacy, my father added gruffly, still unable to look at me. Daniel will carry on the name. The absurdity of the statement was breathtaking. The family legacy they were talking about was built with my money. The foundation they were giving Daniel was one I had laid, brick by painstaking brick. They weren't giving him their legacy, they were giving him mine. I looked from their faces to Daniel S. His smug expression had softened into a mask of feigned sympathy. I'm sure this is a shock, Elara, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. But you know I'll always be there for you. The condescension was the final straw. A strange, glacial calm settled over me. The hurt, the anger, the years of simmering resentment, it all crystallized into a single point of diamond-hard clarity. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to fight for. They had shown me my exact value in their lives. 0. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. The four of them watched me, expecting tears or shouting or perhaps a desperate plea. I gave them none of it. I looked at my mother, then my father. Thank you for the clarification, I said, my voice even and devoid of any emotion. It's good to know where I stand. I didn't look at Daniel. He was irrelevant, a symptom of the disease, not the cause. I turned and walked out of the room, through the hallway filled with family photos that suddenly felt like a museum of a life I'd never truly been a part of. I didn't slam the door. I closed it softly behind me, the quiet click echoing the final, silent severing of a bond I once thought was unbreakable. As I walked to my car, the gray sky finally broke, and a cold rain began to fall. But I didn't feel the chill. Inside, I was perfectly, terrifyingly numb. The drive home was a blur. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers seemed to be counting down the seconds of my old life, washing away the last vestiges of filial obligation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The emotional storm I should have been feeling was absent, replaced by an unnerving and absolute stillness. It was the calm that comes after a building collapses, when the dust settles and you can finally see the raw, exposed foundation underneath. For the first time, I saw my family for what it was. Not a source of love and support, but a financial liability with a negative emotional return. When I got back to my apartment, the silence was a welcome embrace. I took off my damp coat, made a cup of tea, and sat down at my desk. My work laptop was open, displaying the market analysis I'd been working on before my father's call. Numbers, data, facts. In my world, they provided clarity, not betrayal, and that's what I needed now. I opened a new, blank spreadsheet. The cursor blinked on cell A1, a tiny, expectant heartbeat. For years, I had deliberately avoided quantifying my support for my parents. To put a precise number on it felt crass, like I was keeping score. But the meeting I had just left wasn't about love or family, it was about assets and allocation. They had presented me with their accounting of my worth. Now, it was time to do my own. My fingers flew AC. Ross the keyboard. I logged into my online banking portal, the one I used for both my personal accounts and the accounts I managed for them. I went back, year by year, pulling up every transaction, every transfer, every automatic bill payment directed toward their address at 123 Maple Lane. The first line item was the mortgage. For the last 15 years, I had been paying it. $2,250 a month, every month without fail. I entered the formula, my analyst brain taking over. 15 years times 12 months times $2,250. The number that appeared in the cell was staggering, $405,000. That was just the principal and interest. It didn't account for the property taxes and homeowners insurance, which I also paid. I added those columns, pulling the data from my records. Another $8,000 a year for 15 years, $120,000. My breath hitched. In just two categories, I was over $500,000. This wasn't just helping out. This was a full-scale, long-term subsidy of their entire lifestyle. I kept going, fueled by a cold, methodical fury. The utilities, electricity, gas, water, internet, and the premium cable package my father couldn't live without. An average of $500 a month. Over 20 years, that was another $120,000. The car payments, they always had to have new, reliable cars. They de-signed the paperwork, and I would handle the monthly financing. I tallied up the cost of 4 different vehicles over the last 2 decades, $95,000. Then came the miscellaneous expenses, the financial brushfires I was always called upon to extinguish. The $15,000 for the new roof, the $8,000 for my father's dental implants, the $5,000 to cover a credit card debt my mother had forgotten about. I meticulously documented each one, finding the corresponding bank transfers and adding them to the spreadsheet. Each number was a ghost, a memory of a sacrifice they had never seen. I remembered the vacation to Italy I had skipped to pay for that new roof. I remembered the down payment on a condo I had delayed to cover their credit card. As the list grew, a narrative emerged. It was a story of a one-sided relationship, of a daughter who had poured her financial lifeblood into a family that saw her as little more than an income stream. The spreadsheet wasn't just a financial ledger. It was a record of my own invisibility. Every cell was a moment I had chosen their comfort over my own, their security over my own future. When I was finished, nearly 3 hours later, I scrolled to the bottom of the final column and clicked the sum button. The total stared back at me from the screen, stark and unforgiving. $817,450. I leaned back in my chair, the air leaving my lungs in a slow hiss. Over $800,000. The number was obscene. It was a house. It was a comfortable retirement. It was a life of freedom and travel. It was everything I had given away in exchange for a heartfelt thanks in a legal document. The numbness I had been feeling finally began to recede, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a clean, righteous anger. This wasn't about being unloved, it was about being defrauded. They hadn't just taken my money, They had taken my time, my opportunities, my future, all while assuring me it was my duty. And the whole time, they were planning to give the fruits of my labor to Daniel, the golden boy who had never sacrificed a thing. With my mouse, I moved the cursor to my online banking tab. I navigated to the Bill Pay section. A list of my scheduled payments appeared on the screen. 123 Maple Lane Mortgage, payment scheduled for the 1st. City Water Department, payment scheduled for the 5th. State Power and Light, payment scheduled for the 12th. Platinum Cable and Internet, payment scheduled for the 15th. One by one, I clicked on each entry. A confirmation box would pop up. Are you sure you want to cancel this scheduled payment? For each one, my response was the same. I clicked Confirm. The clicks were sharp and definitive, like the sound of a key turning in a lock. With each confirmation, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. It was a systematic dismantling of the invisible architecture that had supported their lives and imprisoned mine. Click, the mortgage was gone. Click, the power was gone. Click, the cable, the water, the insurance, all gone. When I was done, the list of scheduled payments was empty. I had severed the financial cord. The river of money that had flowed from my account to theirs for 2 decades had finally run dry. I looked back at the spreadsheet, at the grand total of my investment. Then I created a new file, saved the spreadsheet under the name Final Accounting, and moved it to the trash. I didn't need the reminder anymore. The discovery was complete. I knew the exact price of my family's love, and I was no longer willing to pay it. The first 2 weeks after the meeting were eerily silent. My phone, which would normally buzz with my mother's trivial updates or my father's indirect reminders about an upcoming bill, remained quiet. It was a tense, unnatural peace, the calm before a storm. I knew they were waiting. They were used to my quiet compliance, my ability to swallow injustice and carry on as usual. They probably thought I was sulking, that I'd have a little cry and then come to my senses, realizing that my duty transcended the petty details of a will. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. During that time, I confided in Chloe. We met at our usual coffee shop, and I laid out the entire story, from the formal summons to the lawyer's monotone delivery of my disinheritance, to the spreadsheet and the final, satisfying clicks of cancellation. Chloe listened intently, her expression shifting from disbelief to pure fury on my behalf. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Good for you," she said, her voice fierce. "It's about time. I'm so proud of you, Alara. What they did isn't just cruel, it's theft. They stole your future to give it to that deadbeat." Her validation was like a balm on a wound I didn't realize was still so raw. "I just feel numb," I confessed. "Angry, but also strangely peaceful. Is that weird?" "It's not weird at all," she said, stirring her latte. "It's the feeling of freedom. For the first time in your adult life, you're not responsible for them. Their problems are no longer your problems. So, what's your next move?" "That's the thing," I said, a small, wry smile touching my lips. "There is no next move. The plan is to do nothing." Chloe's eyes lit up with understanding. "The best kind of plan. You're not going to fight them. You're just going to let them deal with the consequences of their own choices." "Exactly," I replied. "The investigation has begun. I'm just a spectator now, watching the results come in." The first result arrived exactly 16 days after the meeting, on the 2nd of the month. A text message from my mother lit up my phone screen. It was as if the last 2 weeks of silence had never happened. No greeting, no apology, no acknowledgement of the monumental betrayal. Just 5 brutally entitled words: "Mortgage payment hasn't cleared. Fix it." I stared at the message, a bubble of incredulous laughter rising in my chest. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. They had stripped me of my inheritance, declared me worthless in their eyes, and still expected me to pay the mortgage on the house they were giving to someone else. It was a level of cognitive dissonance that was truly breathtaking. I let the message sit for a full hour. I imagined my mother checking her phone every few minutes, her impatience growing, her confusion turning to annoyance. I wanted her to feel a sliver of the powerlessness I had felt my entire life. When I finally decided to reply, I chose my words carefully. I typed a short, simple, and devastatingly clear response. Ask your real son. I hit send. The silence that followed was more profound than the 2 weeks prior. It was an active, ringing silence, filled with the dawning horror of my parents realizing their primary asset had just been frozen. That text message was the first shot fired in a war I intended to win by doing absolutely nothing. My part was to observe, to investigate the fallout of their decision from a safe and clinical distance. Every Friday afternoon, after closing out my work for the week, I initiated a new ritual. I would pour myself a glass of wine, open my laptop, and navigate to the county's public records website. It was all there, available to any citizen who knew where to look. Deeds, liens, and notices of default. The first few weeks there was nothing, but I was patient. I understood the timeline of financial decay better than anyone. It takes time for the system to catch up. Then, in the 6th week, it appeared. A notice of intent to foreclose filed against Richard and Margaret Vance for the property at 123 Maple Lane. The bank had sent its first official warning. I took a screenshot of the notice and saved it to a folder on my desktop labeled Consequences. A cold sense of satisfaction washed over me. This wasn't vengeful glee. It was the quiet affirmation of a scientist whose hypothesis has just been proven correct. The hypothesis was simple. Without my constant intervention, their carefully constructed world was unsustainable. The calls started shortly after. First, my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a torrent of panicked accusations. "Ilara, I don't know what kind of childish game you're playing, but the bank is threatening to take our home. We got a letter. After everything we've done for you, how could you be so ungrateful? You owe us. You call me back this instant." "Owe you?" I thought, replaying the message. The word was poison. I had paid my dues 100 times over. I deleted the voicemail without a flicker of guilt. A few days later, my father called. His approach was different. An attempt at gruff, paternal authority. "Ilara, your mother is very upset. You need to stop this nonsense and transfer the money. You've made your point. Now it's time to be a responsible adult." I almost laughed. A responsible adult. That's all I had ever been. I let his call go unanswered as well. I knew this was just the beginning. Their panic was a leading indicator, and I was tracking it as dispassionately as I would track a volatile stock. They had made their choice in that living room, surrounded by legal papers. They had chosen their heir. Now, my investigation was focused on a single question. What would their chosen heir do? I was fairly certain I already knew the answer. Daniel was a black hole for money, not a source of it. And I would have a front-row seat to watch my parents discover that fact for themselves. My strategy was simple, elegant, and required almost no effort on my part. It was a plan of passive resistance, of weaponized silence. My parents and Daniel had built their entire dynamic with me on the foundation of my reliability. They would push, and I would yield. They would demand, and I would provide. My plan was to remove that foundation and let their own weight bring the structure down. I would not engage in screaming matches or tearful recriminations. I would simply refuse to play my assigned role in their drama. The communications from my family began to escalate, following a predictable pattern of decline. They moved from entitlement to confusion, then to panic, and finally to a desperate, clawing form of manipulation. I watched it all unfold on my phone screen, an observer cataloging the stages of their self-inflicted collapse. After my initial text, "Ask your real son," my mother tried a different tactic. She sent a barrage of messages attempting to guilt-trip me. "I can't believe you're doing this to your own mother. My health is not good. The stress is making my blood pressure skyrocket. Your father is so disappointed. He worked his whole life to provide for this family, and this is how you repay him. Do you remember all the sacrifices we made for you? The dance lessons, the braces. We gave you a good life." I read each message and felt nothing but a distant pity for her inability to see the truth. The dance lessons and braces from 25 years ago were a rounding error compared to the fortune I had poured into their lives. I never replied to these messages. Silence was the only appropriate answer to such profound delusion. When the guilt trips failed, the threats began. These usually came in the form of voicemails from my father. "Ilara, this has gone far enough," one message grumbled. "If you don't fix this with the bank, you will be cutting yourself off from this family for good." I saved that voicemail. The irony was so thick it was almost comical. They thought cutting me off was a punishment. They had no idea it was the prize I never knew I was fighting for. Meanwhile, my weekly check of the public records continued. After the initial notice of intent, a lease pendens was filed, a formal notice of a pending lawsuit from the mortgage company. The process was moving forward, slow and inevitable, like a glacier carving through a mountain. The utilities were next. I received a final notice from the power company, forwarded to my address by mistake. It was a bright red paper, screaming disconnection notice. I tossed it in the shredder. It wasn't my problem anymore. Then, Daniel made his first appearance in the crisis. He sent me a message on social media, a platform he favored for its low-effort communication. "Hey Ilara, Mom and Dad are really freaking out. I think you're being a bit harsh. They're old. Can't you just help them out this one time, for me?" The "for me" was a masterful touch. It was the distillation of his entire life philosophy, that the world, and especially my world, should revolve around his needs. All those years, I had resented his ability to get what he wanted without effort. Now, I saw it not as a strength, but as a profound weakness. He had no idea how to solve a problem that couldn't be fixed with charm or a handout. I broke my silence for him. My reply was swift and sharp. "You are the sole heir to an estate worth over $1 million, an estate largely funded by me. The solution to this problem is sitting in your future inheritance. You're the man of the house now, Daniel. Act like it." He didn't reply. I imagine my message was like a complex math problem he had no tools to solve. He was probably expecting me to fold, as I always had. He was not prepared for me to present him with the bill for his own coronation. The most pathetic stage of their campaign came about a month later. The disconnection notices were no longer warnings, they were realities. The premium cable was likely the first to go. Then, the internet. I imagined the indignity of it, the quiet hum of their comfortable life being silenced one service. Tea a time. My mother sent a text that was a complete departure from her previous tones. It was pleading. "Ilara, please, the lights are going to be shut off. We can talk about the will. We made a mistake, just help us. We can fix this." This was the moment I had been waiting for. The admission of a mistake. But it wasn't a genuine apology. It was a bargaining chip, a desperate offer made by someone who had run out of other options. She wasn't sorry for the betrayal, she was sorry for the consequences. And it was far, far too late. The time for fixing things had passed the moment they sat me down in that living room and legally declared my worthlessness. My plan was holding steady. I felt a sense of control I'd never experienced before. Every unanswered call, every deleted voicemail was an act of self-preservation. I was creating a boundary, a wall they could not breach with their guilt, their threats, or their pathetic last-minute pleas. Chloe checked in with me regularly, acting as my anchor. "Are you okay?" she asked during one call. "This has to be taking a toll." "Honestly, Chloe," I said, looking out my window at the city lights, "I've never felt more clear-headed in my life. All those years, I thought their happiness was my responsibility. Now I realize the only person's happiness I'm responsible for is my own, and my plan is working perfectly. All I have to do is sit back and wait for the final act." The final act, I knew, would be the auction date for the house. It was a public event, a final, humiliating chapter in the story they had written for themselves. And as their desperation reached its peak, I braced myself for the final, inevitable confrontation. They had tried everything else. Now they would have to face me directly. The auction date was set. A notice appeared on the county website. The property at 123 Maple Lane was scheduled for public sale in 3 weeks. The wheels of justice, or in this case, the wheels of finance, were grinding towards their inevitable conclusion. The foreclosure was no longer a threat. It was a scheduled event. This new, concrete deadline sent a fresh wave of panic through my family, and the final, desperate phase of their campaign began. My phone started ringing at all hours. They had abandoned texting in favor of direct, frantic calls. I never answered, but I let the voicemails accumulate, listening to them at the end of each day like chapters of a tragic novel. My mother's voice was the most telling. It had lost all its sharp, accusatory edges and was now thin, ragged, and cracking with tears. "Elara, please pick up," one message began. "The lawyer said it's final. They're selling our house. Everything we worked for gone. Where are we supposed to go? We're your parents. How can you let this happen? Don't you have a heart?" Another voicemail, left just hours later, was from my father. His blustering anger was gone, replaced by a defeated, hollow tone I had never heard from him before. "Your mother isn't eating. She just cries all day. I don't know what to do. Just call us back. We can figure something out." The words were designed to break me, to appeal to the deeply ingrained sense of duty they had cultivated in me for decades. A year ago, they would have worked. I would have caved, my heart aching at the thought of their distress. But something fundamental had shifted within me. I heard their pain, but I felt no responsibility for it. Their suffering was not my creation. It was the direct result of their greed and their monumental miscalculation. They had gambled, betting that my loyalty was unconditional. They had lost. The day before the auction, my mother sent a final, desperate text. It was the one I had predicted, the flimsy olive branch extended from a burning building. "We shouldn't have done the will that way. We'll talk to the lawyer, we can change it. Just please call the bank, send the money. We can make this right." The offer was as empty as their initial thank you. They weren't offering to make it right because they had seen the error of their ways. They were offering to make it right because their backs were against the wall. They were negotiating with their only remaining asset, an asset they had already discarded, me. I took my time crafting a reply, each keystroke deliberate and final. "You made your choice in that living room with your lawyer. Now you have to live with it. Daniel is your son and your heir. He is your responsibility." I put my phone on silent and went about my evening. I cooked dinner. I watched a movie. I refused to let their chaos disrupt my peace. But I knew it wasn't over. The final piece of the puzzle had yet to fall into place. That happened at 10 o'clock that night. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, not from my parents, but from Daniel. For the first time, I decided to answer. This was the confrontation I needed to have. "Hello, Daniel," I said, my voice calm and even. His voice on the auth. Hand was a mess. It was cracked and high-pitched with a panic I had never heard from the eternally confident golden boy. "Elara, thank God, you have to help them. Why aren't you helping them? They're going to be homeless tomorrow." "That sounds like a serious problem," I replied, my tone as neutral as if we were discussing the weather. "A problem, it's a catastrophe," he shrieked. "You have the money, I know you do, you can stop this. Why are you being so cruel?" And there it was. The moment my lifetime of quiet resentment finally found its voice. The rage I had suppressed for so long didn't come out as a scream. It emerged as a blade of ice, sharp and precise. "Cruel," I repeated, a low, dangerous calm in my voice. "Let's talk about cruel, Daniel. Is it cruel to be told that your entire life of sacrifice means nothing? Is it cruel to pay the mortgage on a house for 15 years, only to be told it will be given to someone who never contributed a single penny? Is it cruel to have your own parents look you in the eye and legally declare you worthless?" He was silent, stunned by the ferocity of my response. I continued, my voice low and steady. "They didn't just name you their heir, Daniel. They called you their son, their pride, their legacy. They handed you everything on a silver platter, an inheritance I paid for. So this is your moment to shine. This is your time to be the son they always wanted. Step up. Get a loan. Sell something. Use that famous charm of yours to solve a real-world problem for once in your life. It's time to earn the title. He finally found his voice, sputtering excuses. But, I don't have that kind of money, you know that, my business. It's just getting started. That has never stopped you before, I said coolly. You've been getting by on their money, which, let's be clear, was always my money, your entire adult life. The Bank of Alara is closed, permanently. The responsibility is now yours. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To be the one they count on? Well, they're counting on you now. He started to protest again, to ramble about family and forgiveness, but I cut him off. Goodbye, Daniel. I ended the call, clean, final. I blocked his number and then my parents' numbers. The confrontation was over. There was nothing more to say. They had made their choices and I had made mine. The house would be sold in the morning, and with it, the last remnant of the life I had once been forced to maintain. I felt a profound sense of release, as if a great chain had finally been broken. I didn't go to the auction. There was no need. I had no interest in watching the public dismantling of my parents' life or seeing the faces of the strangers who would now live in the rooms I grew up in. Attending would have felt like gloating, and my feelings went far beyond something as petty as triumph. What I felt was a deep, resonant peace, the kind that comes from closing a book with a final, satisfying ending. A week later, I checked the public records one last time. The website had been updated. The property at 123 Maple Lane was listed as sold to a family I didn't recognize. A chapter of my life had been officially, legally, and financially closed. News of the aftermath trickled back to me through a cousin on my mother's side, someone who had always been kind to me and was aware of the family's toxic dynamics. She called, hesitant at first, to see how I was doing. She told me that my parents had been forced to move into a small, two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town. The proceeds from the auction, after paying off the mortgage and legal fees, had left them with very little. And Daniel, their golden boy, their chosen heir, had proven to be exactly the savior I expected him to be. He had moved in with them. Not out of a sense of duty, my cousin explained, but out of necessity. His latest business venture had collapsed, leaving him with nowhere else to go. The tiny apartment was now crowded with 3 adults, suffocating under the weight of their collective failure. Daniel, the man who was supposed to be their glorious legacy, had become their financial and physical burden. The irony was so perfect, so complete, that it felt like something out of a Greek tragedy. My cousin told me that my mother and father were shells of their former selves. Their social life had vanished. Their pride had been shattered. They spent their days blaming each other, blaming the economy, blaming everyone but the 2 people truly responsible, themselves. My name, she said, was never mentioned. It was as if I had ceased to exist. To them, I was no longer an ungrateful daughter. I was a void, a silence where a solution used to be. After that call, I made a conscious decision to stop seeking information. Their story was over. Mine was just beginning. The amount of money that had once been automatically funneled to my parents every month now sat in my own investment account. I watched T grow, a tangible symbol of my newfound freedom. I started planning the trip to Italy I had postponed years ago. I began looking at condos in my neighborhood, not as a distant dream, but as a real possibility. My future, which had been tethered to their past for so long, was now entirely my own. People often think of revenge as a fiery, passionate act. They imagine loud confrontations, dramatic showdowns, and explosive emotions. But they're wrong. True revenge isn't fire, it's ice. It's the quiet, calculated removal of oneself from an equation. It's the cold clarity of understanding your own value and refusing to let others devalue you any longer. When I sat in that living room and listened to that will, I didn't scream or cry. I didn't fight or plead. I simply accepted the information they gave me. They had provided me with the ultimate data point, the one that rendered all previous assumptions obsolete. And like any good financial analyst, I adjusted my strategy based on the new data. I reallocated my assets. The collapse of their world wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was a slow, relentless slide caused by the simple force of gravity, a force I was no longer there to defy. I didn't ruin them. I just stopped saving them. I made them live inside the four walls of their own choices, and I found that those walls were far more confining than any prison I could have designed. Now, months later, when I look back on it all, I don't feel anger or guilt. I don't feel regret. All I feel is a profound sense of clarity. For all those years, I was the daughter who kept the lights on, who paid the bills, who carried the immense weight of their irresponsibility. I was the sturdy, reliable foundation of their lives. But in the end, they made it clear they preferred the flashy, unstable decoration. So I chose myself, and I have never, ever slept better.